Hello and welcome to a GCSE History Revision tutorial. We're going to look at some Paper 2 material and we're going to focus on challenges to Elizabeth at home and abroad from 1569 to 1588. So we're going to be looking at Mary Queen of Scots and the plots that Elizabeth faced after Mary's arrival in England. As with our other revision tutorials, you might like to get yourself some paper or some flashcards ready before we go much further. And at the end of each slide, pause the presentation and make some brief notes. Maybe summarise each bullet point with 2 to 3 words maximum, and then take them away, learn them and memorise them, and then sometime later return to the video again and maybe tick off on your flashcards as the notes are presented. Okay, now we're going to cover quite a lot of material, so you might like to look for the following themes in the presentation, maybe to help things to stick in your memory. So maybe look for the following common characteristics of the plots. So look out for chaotic and weak planning, leading to the plots falling apart. Look out for some effective security by Elizabeth's security forces, led by Francis Walsingham in particular. Also the plots being stopped at an early stage before Elizabeth faced any real actual threat. Strong government reactions are a common theme too, and also keep your eye out for limited and unreliable foreign involvement, again leading to the plots falling apart at an early stage. And then some common impacts as well. Even though these plots don't tend to get very far, they are important because they threaten Elizabeth's security. As a result of the plots, this feeds into an increasingly anti-Catholic mood in Elizabethan England, resulting in anti-Catholic laws being passed. The fallout of court politics was important as well. And the plots have an impact on Elizabeth's domestic authority too, and it really makes it hard for her to fend off the more extreme pressures that she faced from the Protestant side of her court to pass anti-Catholic legislation. And the plots also feed into damaging international relations, particularly with Spain, ultimately culminating in the Spanish Armada. Okay, so let's see how things are going to fit together. Underneath the timeline, you can see 3 key moments of change. Mary arrived in 1568. 2 years after that, Elizabeth was excommunicated by the Pope, and then finally Mary was executed in 1587. And we're going to plot against that 4 plots and rebellions against Elizabeth. So firstly in 1569, the Revolt of the Northern Earls. Then in 1571, the Ridolfi Plot. In 1583, the Throckmorton Plot. And then in 1586, the Babington Plot. So we'll take each of those in turn. We're just firstly going to have a look at the background to Mary Queen of Scots, because she's so important in this period of Elizabeth's reign. So Mary's importance comes from the fact that she provides a possible alternative queen for plotters. Now she's a relation of Elizabeth, she is in the family tree, and her background is really complicated, but she had previously been, when she was much younger, a Queen of France. She'd been married to the French king. This French background is going to be important because it's going to limit Spain's support for her until later in this time span. And she'd fled Scotland, where she'd been ruling as queen, but had then been displaced and imprisoned. And she'd fled England, having escaped from prison. And when she arrives in England, she really becomes Elizabeth's problem, because she is a Catholic alternative to Elizabeth. She'd made her ambitions to become Queen of England quite clear by altering her coat of arms, and she also presents a viable alternative. Firstly, she had a son, which would provide, of course, an heir to the throne, and Elizabeth, of course, didn't have one. And she had those profound links with France that meant she would have some really important backing from the continent. So she's a focus for plots, and she's a real problem because she's too dangerous for Elizabeth to release. Yet she's also a monarch, so she's far too important to easily execute, and the implications of executing her would be really, really serious. That would cause outrage across Europe. So just a quick look here about how, if you are going to make notes on this, how that might look. I'll just pause for a moment here, just so you can take that in. And again, you might like to just stop the presentation here quickly. Okay, so let's look firstly at the revolt of the Northern Earls in 1569. Now the causes of this revolt were quite regional. A group of northern nobles had become increasingly unhappy with the treatment that they'd received from Elizabeth. They'd lost political power in their region. Important names here are Charles Neville, who was the Earl of Westmoreland, and Thomas Percy, who was the Earl of Northumberland. And their plot was fairly straightforward. What they would do is that they would marry Mary Queen of Scots to a leading Catholic nobleman, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, who's in the middle image there. But this would be achieved with support from Spain. But at a fairly early stage, this revolt really fell apart, and weak leadership was key here. Security around the plot was very loose, and Elizabeth's ministers found out about things, and at that point the plotters panic. Some of them went to Elizabeth to beg for mercy. Two of the leaders, so that's Westmoreland and Northumberland, both fled, and the effective reaction of the government, which was prompt and very firm, added to a lack of local support, meant that the revolt was put down really quite in a quite straightforward way. Also, Spain really failed to come through, and Philip was worried that putting Mary Queen of Scots on the throne would not be in his interest because of her French links at this stage. But why this plot is worth looking at and remembering is because this is the first time that Mary is used as a potential alternative to Elizabeth. And of course here we're just 1 year into her stay in England. Okay, so let's look now at the Ridolfi Plot of 1571. Things get increasingly international now. So the causes of this plot was that, firstly, there's a bit of fallout here from the Northern Rising. The measures that were taken in the north to pacify and to bring it back under control have been quite strict. Also, this is a year following Elizabeth's excommunication, which is where the Pope decreed that she was no longer the rightful Queen of the country, and that Catholics had a duty to remove her from the throne. And we can add to this Thomas Howard's own ambition to make himself king. And you might start to see now some familiar things going on. So the plan was to kill Elizabeth, for there then to be a Spanish invasion, install Mary Queen of Scots on the throne, and then she would then marry Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk. A key figure in this is Roberto Ridolfi, an international banker. Because of his role as an international banker, he could move fairly fluently around the courts of Europe, making links and passing messages, that kind of thing. But because he was meeting so many people, again, security in the plot was loose, and Elizabeth's Secretary of State, a really important figure for us called Francis Walsingham, who's in the bottom image, discovered this. And simply the plot fell apart and Norfolk was executed. Now the reasons for the failure of this plot are the effective spy network of Francis Walsingham, and this is a highly efficient operation, and again we'll see this returning as a characteristic of future plots as well. Again we saw a prompt reaction from Elizabeth's government, that the Spanish ambassador was quickly expelled from the country, and again there was only limited Spanish support for this plot. Philip made it clear that he would only be sending forces once Elizabeth had been killed, and again that causes delay, allowing the security around the plot to fall apart. Okay, we're going to move forward into the 1580s at this point, so we're going to leave a good 10-12 years and have a look at the Throckmorton plot of 1583. Again, this is quite international, and we're going to see a few changes, but again, look out for some familiar themes. So causes of this plot and the background were increased tensions with Spain and increasingly harsh anti-Catholic laws, as Elizabeth's government and ministers were increasingly concerned about the threats that Elizabeth faced from Catholics. You might tie some of this into your knowledge of Elizabeth's religious policies. So the plan of the plot was again fairly straightforward. It would again be in the north of the country, this time supported by a French invasion, but with Spanish money funding the operation, and installing Mary Queen of Scots as Queen. A key plotter here is Francis Throckmorton, a well-connected Catholic figure at court, who would coordinate information. Now, he met regularly with the Spanish ambassador, but because he was meeting so frequently with the Spanish ambassador, who was carefully watched by Walsingham, surveillance betrayed what he was up to. So again, Walsingham's effective spy network is crucial here. There were also delays around Philip of Spain not providing necessary finance, and the fact that from a very early stage, Walsingham was very clued up about what was going on. Okay, we're going to look finally at the Babington plot of 1586, a plot that directly leads to Mary Queen of Scots' execution. So we've looked at some fairly familiar themes now. I want you to get an idea that at this point, Elizabeth's ministers, Francis Walsingham, and another one of her secretaries, William Cecil, are really waiting to eliminate Mary Queen of Scots, and are looking to build evidence against her. And this plot may well have actually been a construction of Francis Walsingham. It was certainly encouraged by one of his double agents. He had a double agent called Gilbert Gifford, who encouraged the plotters to continue with things, so just to allow him to build a case against Mary Queen of Scots. So the plan was to kill Elizabeth, and for there to be a French invasion in support of this. And finally, Mary was found to be complicit in this. So she was found, as you can see in the top images, smuggling coded messages in and out of her sort of forced imprisonment, and these were intercepted and read by Walsingham. The one that does for her is a note that says, "Let the great plot commence," which is pretty definite that she was encouraging Elizabeth's death. So the plotters were executed, and then Mary Queen of Scots was put on trial for treason, which in itself was really controversial and would cause outrage in the end across Europe. So the reasons for the failure of this plot, that from a really early stage Walsingham discovered it, but then also encouraged the plot with his double agent, hoping to collect evidence that he would needed to convince Elizabeth to execute her relative. Okay, so let's turn finally to Mary Queen of Scots' execution in 1587, which brings this period to a close. So she was found guilty of treason after the Babington plot, with William Cecil and Francis Walsingham both pushing Elizabeth to execute her. Elizabeth was highly reluctant to do this because she knew the outrage that this would cause. But Mary was beheaded in 1587 in a bungled execution that in itself caused outrage across the courts of Europe. So while this increased Elizabeth's domestic security, it brings this period of plots to a close. It did cause international outrage, and it particularly infuriated Philip of Spain. Relations with Spain were already pretty much at rock bottom, but this pushed it even further down, with Philip outraged that a fellow Catholic monarch had been executed by a Protestant. Okay, so you might like to take this a little bit further, maybe a little bit of practice. If you do, here's a 16-mark judgment question. And what you might like to do is to follow our usual structure in doing this. So you'll need to write yourself an introduction, 3 topic paragraphs, and then our usual balanced conclusion. For more guidance on how to do those kind of judgment questions, just look for other videos on our CHSG History channel. Okay, that brings us to an end. Good luck with your revision, and thanks for watching.